Can you actually count on Canada Pension Plan and old age security being there and lasting throughout your retirement when you need it? I get asked this question a ton, and it's a fair question because CPP and OAS make up a huge chunk of most people's retirement income. Fact is, these are two totally different animals, and there's good news and there's bad news. Let me explain. First of all, what am I doing here? There's actually a couple different reasons. One, I get sick and tired of being in my office all the time. And the other is that I actually think that this place is an excellent example of something that took quite a bit of effort, strategy, and cooperation to build. And it was built to last, and it was built to keep going and to work indefinitely. But it didn't really play out that way, did it? Now, what about CPP and OAS? Now, these programs are really quite good. And they were built with a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of cooperation, and they were meant to last. But does that mean that they will? Well, first of all, we got to get some facts straight when it comes to these programs. For instance, there is an enormous amount of money in the CPP pot. There's actually $536 billion in there as of last reporting. And that is really good news. And the reason there's so much money in there is that it's actually made up of employee and employer contributions. So this is not a gift from the government. This is actually our money. We've been saving it. And this money is set aside and it is managed by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, which importantly is not the government. It is a separate entity entirely. And believe it or not, this pot of money is actually really well run. In fact, they posted an average rate of return of 10% a year for the last decade. That's really good. And this plan is good to go for the next 75 years. So if your life expectancy is within the next 75 years, you're good. Now, that said, look around me. Obviously, sometimes things don't go as planned, and I think it's at least wise for us to consider the possibility that things could go sideways. Now, I don't want to go overboard with this, and so I'm not going to, but I do want to highlight the fact that much of the reason that CPP is doing so well is due to the fact that our government is not in charge of running it. All we have to do is look at our country's last budget, our crazy deficits, and our staggering national debt to see where things go when our government runs them. Bottom line is this: our CPP is good to go for the next 75 years because our government doesn't run it. But should that change, and history definitely shows us that things like that can and do happen, well, that would be bad, bad news. Now, old age security, on the other hand, is an entirely different animal. There is nothing in it. There is no pot of money, and that is bad news. OAS is funded entirely by government revenue, taxes. And it's a growing expense because in Canada, we actually have an aging population. And what that means is that the percentage of our population that is working and paying the bulk of the taxes is actually shrinking. And the percentage of our population that is retiring and tapping into the benefits that those taxes are paying for is growing. And this is a bad combo, especially since our government already spends way more than it has. And so if we can't afford the things that we're spending on now, how are we going to afford the things that we're promising in the future, such as decades of nonstop and increasing old age security payments? OAS is funded by debt, and this is bad news. But does it mean that it's doomed? No, it doesn't mean that. And that's because our government can just print more money. And that's exactly what they do. They don't have enough. They can only tax people so much before they'll get kicked out of office. And so the only other simple solution is to print money. And I know, the Bank of Canada is the one that's in charge of the printing press, not the government. But you got to admit, the line between those two is getting blurrier and blurrier. Now, obviously, it would be lovely if inventing money out of thin air could just solve all of our problems, but it doesn't. It just leads to high inflation, which is actually just a sneaky way for the government to tax us without technically taxing us. When we print into oblivion, all it does is make our money lose its value. It just takes more of it to buy the same stuff. So then, is OAS doomed? No. And no government would dare even try to ever take it away. In fact, the Conservatives tried to tinker with it just a bit. They tried to raise the starting age from 65 to 67, like many other countries have been doing, just to make it more sustainable. But they got the boot, and then the Liberals just reversed it, back to age 65. You see, it's very difficult to wheel back a benefit once people get used to it, and woe to any government that tries. However, if we don't do anything to rein in our spending and we just keep speeding towards this debt and money printing cliff, then our money is just going to continue to be worth less and less, and our credit even more so. I remember back in the early years of my practice after the global financial crisis of 08, 09, Greece had simply spent way more than it had for too long, and no one would lend them anything anymore. And so one of the things they had to cut was their pension program, and that did not go over very well at all with the people of Greece. We live in a wonderful country. Canada is awesome on a whole stack of levels, but we have to take care of her if we want to keep it that way. And while I do have confidence in our public pension plans, blind belief in permanently sunny days is profoundly naive.